My name is Emma, and I am 28 years old. My parents don't like me to follow the artistic path. They always want me to do business, like my brother. That's the model my parents want. 1. It began as most of my family's dismissals did, with a sound. Not a word, but the soft, almost imperceptible sigh my mother would release whenever I spoke of my passions. It was a sound of gentle, weary disappointment, the auditory equivalent of a slow shake of the head. It was the sound of a dream deflating. I first heard it when I was 7, proudly presenting a crayon drawing of a sunset over our backyard. The sky was a furious swirl of orange magenta, and a deep, impossible indigo I'd named Nightfall Blue. I'd used an entire pack of crayons, pressing down so hard the waxy nubs were worn down to my fingertips. My brother David, who was 9, had just received a certificate for excellence in mathematics. It was printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, his name inscribed in a regal looping font. My father had clapped him on the back, a booming, percussive sound of pride that echoed in our small living room. "That's my boy," he'd declared. "A mind for numbers. That'll take you places." Then I held up my drawing. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with comparison. My father squinted. "What's all that, Emmy?" he'd asked, not unkindly, but with the same tone he used when trying to decipher a smudge on the wall. I explained my nightfall blue, my furious sunset. He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Very creative?" And then my mother, with her gentle, soul-crushing sigh. "That's lovely, dear," she said, her eyes already drifting back to David's certificate, which was destined for a prominent spot on the refrigerator. "But you've gotten crayon all over your hands. Go wash up for dinner." My masterpiece, the vibrant explosion of my 7-year-old soul, was not placed on the refrigerator. It was laid on the kitchen counter, where it was soon obscured by a stack of mail, and a day later found its way into the recycling bin, stained with a ring of coffee from my father's mug. That was the template, the blueprint for the next 2 decades of my life. David was the golden child, the tangible proof of my parents' successful progeny. His path was linear, logical, and lucrative. He aced his exams, went to a prestigious business school, and landed a high-paying job in finance before the ink on his diploma was dry. His accomplishments were framed, celebrated at family gatherings, and recited to friends with a reverence usually reserved for saints. He was the sturdy, reliable oak tree in our family's garden. I, on the other hand, was the wildflower, unpredictable, uncultivated, and ultimately useless in their eyes. My interests were deemed phases. My love for art was a hobby. My quiet, observational nature was misinterpreted as aimlessness. Throughout my adolescence, the dismissals became more pointed. When I spent a summer learning to develop my own film in a makeshift darkroom in our basement, the chemical smell was a constant source of complaint. "I don't know why you waste your time with that stuff, Emma," my father would say, waving a hand in front of his nose as he descended the stairs to fetch a tool. "There's no future in it. Everything's digital now anyway." He wasn't wrong about the digital part, but he was wrong about the future. He was wrong about me. My mother's approach was softer, more insidious. She'd leave brochures for nursing school or paralegal programs on my pillow. "Just something to think about, honey," she'd whisper, as if she were imparting a secret. "A stable career. Something to fall back on." The implication was clear: my own pursuits were destined for failure, and I would inevitably come crawling back in need of a practical skill to save me from a life of artistic poverty. The comparisons to David were relentless. "Did you hear David just closed a huge deal at work? His boss is taking the whole team to a steakhouse," my mom would announce over dinner, her voice beaming. I could have just had a photograph accepted into a local student exhibition, but my news would wither in the shadow of his corporate triumph. "Oh, that's nice, dear," would be the inevitable deflating response. The subtext was always the same. His success was real, quantifiable in dollars and promotions. Mine was fleeting, subjective, and ultimately meaningless in the grand scheme of their world. They didn't see the hours I spent waiting for the perfect light, the patient dance with shadows and composition. They didn't see the meticulous work in the darkroom, the magic of an image slowly appearing on paper under the soft red glow. They saw only a mess of chemicals and a waste of time, a daughter who was drifting further and further from the safe harbor of their expectations. I was the family's resident ghost, present in body, but an enigma in spirit, my true self, a developing image they never bothered to watch emerge. They loved me, I suppose, in the way one loves a slightly disappointing but familiar piece of furniture. They just didn't particularly like or understand the person I was becoming. And so I learned to become that person in secret. My secret world began with a Minolta X700. I bought it for $45 from a pawn shop when I was 16. It was heavy in my hands, a solid mechanical thing of metal and glass. It felt like a promise. The leatherette was peeling slightly at the edges, and it had a faint metallic scent I came to associate with purpose. My parents had given me money for a new graphing calculator for my pre-calculus class, a subject I was failing with spectacular grace. The calculator was meant to be a tool for my betterment, to nudge me back onto the straight and narrow path David had so effortlessly paved. Instead, I took the bus downtown, my heart thumping with a giddy, illicit thrill, and bought the camera. I told my parents the calculator was on back order. It was one of the first significant lies I told them, a foundational brick in the wall I was slowly building between my life and their perception of it. That camera became an extension of my body. I carried it everywhere. The world, which often felt overwhelming and discordant, suddenly snapped into focus through the tiny rectangle of the viewfinder. It was a filter, a frame, a way to impose order on chaos. I could isolate a moment, capture the fleeting geometry of light falling on a dusty windowsill, or the unguarded expression on a stranger's face. In a world where I felt consistently unseen, the camera gave me the power to see. It reversed the dynamic. I was no longer the object of dismissive glances. I was the observer, the one in control of the narrative. My first rolls of film were a disaster. They were blurry, overexposed, underexposed, a catalog of technical failures. But within the mess, there were glimmers of something more. A shot of my grandmother's hands, the skin a roadmap of wrinkles and veins resting on her floral print dress. A picture of a lone, rain-slicked leaf clinging to a spiderweb. These were the images that kept me going. They were quiet, unassuming, much like myself. They were the things most people overlooked, but through my lens they became imbued with a kind of sacred importance. I wasn't interested in capturing the grand performative moments my family celebrated. I was drawn to the silent interstitial spaces in between. Developing the film was a ritual. I'd wait until my parents were asleep, then creep down into the damp, musty basement that had become my sanctuary. I had an old enlarger I'd bought with saved-up lunch money and a set of developing trays scavenged from a garage sale. Under the eerie crimson glow of the safe light, the world fell away. The only sounds were the gentle sloshing of chemicals, the rhythmic click of the timer, and the frantic beating of my own heart. It was alchemy. Watching an image ghost onto the paper in the developer tray felt like witnessing a miracle of birth. It was a secret I was creating, a truth I was coaxing out of light and shadow. My parents, of course, remained oblivious to the depth of my obsession. To them, the camera was just another one of my quirky accessories, like the worn-out combat boots I favored, or the obscure bands I listened to. "Are you still playing with that old thing?" my dad would ask, a note of amusement in his voice. The word playing always stung. It was a deliberate infantilization of my passion, a way to keep it contained within the realm of childish hobbies. It wasn't work. It wasn't study. It was playing. David, in contrast, worked on his investments. He studied market trends. The language they used built a hierarchy of worth, and I was always at the bottom. I never corrected them. I never said, "No, I'm not playing. I'm learning about aperture and shutter speed. I'm studying the zone system. I'm trying to create something that matters." To say those words out loud would be to offer up my fragile, burgeoning passion for their inevitable dismissal. It was safer in the dark, safer in the silence of the basement, safer within the confines of my own mind. So I just smiled and nodded. Yeah, just playing. The lie was easier than the heartbreak of their indifference. It was a shield, and behind that shield, I was becoming a photographer. Adolescence was a minefield of expectations. The pressure to conform to sketch out a sensible future was immense and suffocating. It came from all sides, but the most intense bombardment came from within the four walls of my own home. My high school's career day was a particularly brutal affair. My mother insisted on attending the parent-teacher-student conferences that followed ostensibly to be supportive, but in reality, to act as a rudder steering my ship towards a safe, predictable port. I remember sitting in the guidance counselor's stuffy beige office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and anxiety. I had tentatively mentioned my interest in applying to art school. The words felt foreign and audacious in my mouth. Before the counselor, a kind but overworked woman named Mrs. Gable, could even respond, my mother jumped in. "Oh, that's just a little hobby of hers," she said with a light dismissive laugh. "Emma is very practical deep down. We've been talking about programs with more stability. Communications, perhaps, or marketing. Something that uses her creative side, but in a corporate setting." She said the word corporate with a reverent hush, as if it were a synonym for paradise. I felt my face flush with a hot, prickly shame. I looked down at my hands, at the faint silver nitrate stains under my fingernails that never quite washed away. My hobby. My practical deep-down self. It was a version of me I didn't recognize, a character they had invented to make themselves more comfortable. Mrs. Gable, caught in the crossfire, could only offer a weak smile and a handful of brochures for the State University's business school. The message was clear: my own ambitions were not to be taken seriously. Meanwhile, David's star continued its brilliant ascent. He was elected student body president, his victory speech peppered with the kind of confident, empty platitudes that adults seemed to adore. He was captain of the debate team. He got a perfect score on his SATs. Each achievement was a spectacle. My father would call our relatives, his voice booming with pride. My mother would bake his favorite cake. His trophies and awards began to colonize the mantelpiece, pushing aside the few framed photos of me as a child. He was the family's success story, and I was becoming a footnote. The few times I tried to share my own small victories, they were met with a polite, vacant enthusiasm that was somehow more painful than outright scorn. When I won third place in a statewide photography contest for a stark black and white image of a decaying fence post, I made the mistake of showing the certificate to my father. He glanced at it for a moment, his eyes scanning for a dollar amount. Finding none, he handed it back to me. "Third place, huh? Well, keep at it. Maybe one day you'll get first." It wasn't meant to be cruel, but it was. It implied that my achievement was incomplete, a stepping stone to something else, not something to be celebrated in its own right. David's victories were never treated as stepping stones. They were destination summits to be admired. This was when the emotional withdrawal truly began hardening from a conscious choice into a reflex. I stopped talking about my photography. I stopped showing them my prints. My secret world, once a source of private joy, now became a fortress. My camera was my co-conspirator. My darkroom was my bunker. I built my life in the negative space of their expectations. They wanted me to join the yearbook club to improve my people skills. I did, but I spent my time in the darkroom teaching myself advanced printing techniques, not at the bake sales they envisioned. They encouraged me to get a part-time job to learn the value of $1. I got a job at a 1-hour photo lab, not for the minimum wage, but for the free access to their professional-grade equipment and the endless supply of discarded expired film I could take home to experiment with. My life split into two distinct channels. There was the Emma my family saw, a quiet, slightly sullen teenager who was average in school and vague about her future. The one who got B's and C's, who was finding herself a euphemism they used that dripped with condescension. And then there was the real Emma, the one who lived and breathed f-stops and focal lengths. The one who could spend 6 hours in the cold trying to capture the way frost formed on a window pane. The one who felt more at home with the ghosts of images in a chemical bath than with the living, breathing people in her own family. The disconnect was a chasm, and I was the only one who knew how to cross it. And I had no intention of building them a bridge. The university compromise was my mother's magnum opus of passive-aggressive guidance. I was forbidden from applying exclusively to art schools. That was a non-negotiable. "We are not paying for you to get a degree in basket weaving," Emma, my father, had stated with an air of finality. But they conceded that I could apply to state universities with strong arts departments as long as I declared a sensible major. It was a strategic retreat on their part, a way to maintain the illusion of control. I chose a large, sprawling state school 3 hours away, far enough for a semblance of autonomy, but close enough to placate them. I declared my major as communications, a field so vaguely defined that it satisfied their need for practicality, and I immediately enrolled in every photography class I could, from the Introductory 101 to the advanced graduate-level seminars that I had to beg my way into. It was in one of these seminars, The Theory and Practice of the Photographic Image, that I met Professor Alistair Finch. He was a terrifying figure, a man who seemed to be composed entirely of tweed sharp angles and intellectual disdain. He had a shock of unruly white hair, spectacles perched perpetually on the end of his nose, and a reputation for eviscerating student work with a surgical precision that left most of his class in tears. He spoke in long, labyrinthine sentences, referencing obscure European philosophers and long-dead photographers as if they were old friends. Most students were terrified of him. I was captivated. For the first few weeks, he barely acknowledged my existence. He would pace the seminar room, dissecting the work of Cartier-Bresson or Diane Arbus, his voice a dry academic rasp. Our first assignment was to produce a single image that defined our personal visual thesis. A vague and intimidating prompt. While my classmates shot technically perfect but soulless landscapes or edgy self-conscious portraits, I went back to what I knew. I submitted a close-up of a crack in a pavement from which a single defiant weed was sprouting. It was an image I had tried to capture 100 times, and I had finally gotten it right. The focus was so sharp, you could see the individual grains of asphalt, the tiny fragile hairs on the weed's stem. During the critique, he projected my image onto the large screen at the front of the room. The silence was deafening. I braced myself for the verbal onslaught. Alistair walked up to the screen, his shadow falling across the image. He was silent for what felt like an eternity. "Most of you," he began, his voice unusually quiet, his back still to the class, "are tourists with cameras. You point your lens at something you find vaguely interesting. You click the shutter and you call it art. You are documenting. You are not seeing." He turned around, his sharp, bird-like eyes, scanning the room until they landed on me. "Who shot this?" I raised a trembling hand. "I did. Emma Vance." He stared at me, then back at the image. "Miss Vance?" He said, the name sounding strange and formal. "This is not a photograph of a weed." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "This is a photograph about resilience. It is about the tenacity of life in the face of overwhelming monolithic indifference. It has texture, it has narrative, and it has a point of view. It is, in short, the only photograph submitted to me this week that is not complete and utter garbage." He then spent the next 20 minutes deconstructing my image, praising the composition, the use of depth of field, the tonal range. He was harsher in his praise than he was in his criticism of others. He wasn't giving me a compliment. He was acknowledging a fact. That day, something inside me shifted. For the first time, someone I respected had seen my work and understood it not just on a superficial level, but on a deeply intellectual and emotional one. He saw the story I was trying to tell. He gave me a vocabulary for my instincts. Alistair became my mentor, my champion, and my harshest critic. He pushed me relentlessly. Sentimentality is the enemy, Miss Vance, he would scold, circling a print with a red pen. Do not tell me what to feel. Show me something that makes me feel. He loaned me books from his personal library, introduced me to the work of photographers I'd never heard of, and argued with me for hours about theory and aesthetics. He never asked about my family or my life outside the darkroom. Our relationship was confined to the world of images. He was validating the part of me that I kept hidden from everyone else. He was the first person to call me a photographer without any qualifiers, without the word aspiring attached to it. Under his tutelage, my hobby became my craft. My passion, which had been a secret, shameful thing, began to feel like a calling. My family continued to ask about my communications classes. I'd give them vague, cheerful updates about group projects and marketing theory, all the while knowing that my real education was happening under the red glow of a safe light, with the gruff, brilliant Alistair Finch as my guide. He was the parent my artistic self had been searching for, and he was helping me build a future my real parents could never have imagined. After graduation, the real world hit with the force of a tidal wave. My parents, satisfied that my communications degree was a respectable, if not stellar, achievement, expected me to move back home, find a local marketing job, and settle into the life they had prescribed. The pressure was immense, a return to the suffocating atmosphere of my adolescence. David, ever the paragon of filial duty, had bought a house in a neighboring suburb, complete with a wife who looked great in pastels and a golden retriever. The stage was set for my capitulation. I lasted 2 months. The experience was a Dantean circle of hell reserved for misunderstood artists. My father would leave job listings from the local paper on the kitchen table, all for positions like junior marketing assistant or social media coordinator for a dental practice. My mother would sigh her signature sigh every time she walked past my bedroom, where I'd be hunched over my laptop, not applying for jobs, but editing photos from a series I was working on about abandoned gas stations. You have a degree, Emma, she'd say, her voice thick with a pained sort of bewilderment. You should be using it. They couldn't understand that I was using it. I was communicating, just not with their approved vocabulary. I knew I had to leave. I packed 2 suitcases, and my camera bag, drained my meager savings account, and moved to the city. I found a tiny 5th-floor walk-up apartment with questionable plumbing, and a roommate I found on Craigslist. My parents were horrified. To them, this wasn't a brave leap of faith. It was a foolish, reckless act of self-sabotage. It was proof of my inherent instability, my inability to function in the real world. What are you running away from, Emma? My father demanded over the phone, his voice a mixture of anger and genuine confusion. I couldn't tell him I wasn't running away from anything. I was running towards myself. Life in the city was a relentless grind. I got a job as a barista, the pre-dawn starts, and the cloying smell of burnt coffee, a constant reminder of the life I was trying to build beyond it. Every dollar I earned was triaged. Rent, ramen, and the rest, every single spare cent went into my photography. I bought a used professional-grade lens that cost more than my first 2 months' rent. I invested in archival paper and high-quality ink for my printer. I built a portfolio brick by painstaking brick. My days were a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. I'd work the morning shift at the coffee shop, my mind a million miles away, composing shots in my head as I frothed milk. After my shift, I'd grab my camera and walk the city for hours until my feet ached and my shoulders burned from the weight of my bag. I was chasing light, hunting for moments. I shot the lonely balletic dance of plastic bags caught in the wind, The harsh geometry of fire escapes against brick, the weary faces on the late-night subway. I was building a visual language, a body of work that was raw and honest and mine. The nights were for editing. I'd sit in my tiny room, the glow of the monitor illuminating my face and work until my eyes blurred. I submitted my work to every online gallery, every magazine, every competition I could find. The rejections piled up, hundreds of them. Form emails that all said some variation of thank you for your interest, but each one was a small sting, a confirmation of the doubts my family had so diligently planted in my head. But my conversations with Alistair, who I still called once a month, kept me going. He'd look at my new work online and offer his blunt, invaluable feedback. "Less poetry, more truth, Miss Vance," he'd say. "The world has enough pretty pictures. Show me its bones." I took on free gigs to build my portfolio. I shot headshots for aspiring actors who paid me in pizza. I photographed the inventory for a friend's Etsy shop. I did a wedding for a cousin of my roommate for $100 and a piece of cake. Each job, no matter how small, was a lesson. I learned how to work with clients, how to manage expectations, how to shoot under pressure. My family on my rare obligatory trips home for holidays saw none of this. They saw a 20-something daughter who worked in a coffee shop, who was always tired, and who didn't seem to have any prospects. "Are you still taking your little pictures?" my mother would ask, her tone laced with a pity that felt like acid. I'd just nod and change the subject. Explaining the hustle, the passion, the sheer force of will it took to keep going was pointless. They wouldn't have understood. So I let them believe I was failing. It was easier than trying to translate a language they refused to learn. In their eyes, I was adrift. In my own, I was finally truly at work. The first crack of light in the long, dark tunnel of my artistic struggle came in the form of a small, independent magazine called Urban Canvas. It was a quarterly publication, fiercely local, with a gritty, unapologetic aesthetic that celebrated the underbelly of city life. It was the kind of magazine my parents would have found grimy and depressing. I had been following their work for months, admiring their bold layouts and the raw talent of the photographers they featured. On a whim, after a particularly grueling week at the coffee shop, I submitted a series of 5 photos I'd titled Nocturne in Concrete. It was a collection of images taken between the hours of 2 and 4 a.m., focusing on the desolate liminal spaces of the city, an empty laundromat bathed in fluorescent light, a lone figure waiting at a bus stop shrouded in fog, a rain-slicked alleyway reflecting the neon sign of a closed bar. I sent the email and promptly forgot about it, assuming it would vanish into the same digital ether that had swallowed hundreds of my previous submissions. 2 weeks later, an email with the subject line, "Your submission to Urban Canvas," landed in my inbox. I almost deleted it, assuming it was another polite rejection. But my cursor hovered, and I clicked. The editor, a woman named Maya, didn't just accept one photo. She wanted to run the entire 5-photo series as the featured portfolio in their upcoming issue, and they would pay me $300. I stared at the email, reading and rereading the words until they blurred. $300. It felt like $1 million. It wasn't just the money, though. The thought of being able to pay my electricity bill without having a low-grade panic attack was intoxicating. It was the validation. It was the fact that a stranger, a professional editor, had seen my work and deemed it worthy. Not just worthy of a single spot, but a full feature. I felt a dizzying, unfamiliar lightness in my chest. I wanted to shout, to run up to the roof of my building and scream the news to the indifferent city below. For a fleeting moment, I considered calling my parents. The urge was primal, a childish instinct to run to them with my prize to say, "See, I told you. It wasn't a waste of time." I even picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's contact. But then I imagined the conversation. "Oh, that's wonderful, dear. Urban Canvas. I've never heard of it. Is it a big magazine? The inevitable questions that would subtly diminish the achievement. The comparison to David's latest bonus. The final lukewarm. Well, that's nice. The thought of their reaction was like a bucket of cold water. It would taint the purity of the moment. This victory was mine. I had earned it in the lonely pre-dawn hours, fueled by cheap coffee and stubborn hope. It belonged to me and to the world I had built for myself, the world they were not a part of. I put the phone down. Instead, I called Alistair. He picked up on the second ring. "Finch." He answered, his voice a gravelly bark. I told him the news, my own voice trembling with excitement. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a horrifying second, I thought he was going to dismiss it as a minor achievement. "Well, it's about time someone had the good sense to publish you," he finally said, and I could hear the ghost of a smile in his gruff voice. "It is a competent series, if a bit maudlin. But the laundromat shot? That one has teeth. Don't let it go to your head, Miss Vance. The real work is just beginning." It was the highest form of praise I could have imagined from him, and it meant more to me than 1,000 hollow compliments from my family. When the magazine came out, I went to a newsstand and bought 10 copies. The paper felt heavy and glossy in my hands. Seeing my photos in print, my name Emma Vance in a clean sans serif font beneath them, was an out-of-body experience. It was real, tangible, a piece of evidence. I taped one of the spreads to the wall of my cramped bedroom. It was my own personal certificate, my own trophy on my own mantelpiece. My family never saw it. When they asked what was new, I told them I'd picked up a few extra shifts at the coffee shop. I let them continue to see the struggling barista. It was safer that way, because this small victory wasn't for them. It was a promise I was making to myself, a confirmation that I was on the right path, even if I was the only one who could see it. The Veridian Prize for Photography. Even the name sounded prestigious, unattainable. It was the Everest of the photographic world, an international award that could launch a career into the stratosphere. The previous winners were giants photographers whose work I had studied with a kind of religious awe. To even consider entering felt like an act of supreme arrogance. But Alistair Finch, in his infinite and terrifying wisdom, thought otherwise. He called me a few months after the Urban Canvas feature. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Vance, the Veridian Prize, submissions close in a month. I've already sent you the link. Don't disappoint me." Then he hung up. I stared at my phone, my heart doing a frantic, syncopated rhythm against my ribs. The Veridian Prize? It was absurd. My work was small, quiet, intensely personal. The winners of the Veridian shot war zones, epic landscapes, groundbreaking conceptual pieces. What could I possibly submit that would stand up to that level of scrutiny? I clicked the link he'd sent, my hand unsteady. The entry fee alone was $150, almost a week's worth of tips from the coffee shop. It felt like setting fire to money I didn't have. For weeks, I was paralyzed by self-doubt. The voices of my parents, the years of dismissals, all came rushing back. A hobby, a phase, no future in it. I looked at my portfolio, and all I could see were its flaws. The compositions felt clumsy, the lighting amateurish. Who was I to think I could compete on a global stage? I was a barista who took pictures of weeds and lonely laundromats. I almost closed the browser a dozen times, but Alistair's gruff, commanding voice echoed in my head. "Don't disappoint me." He hadn't said good luck or give it a shot. He had said, "Don't disappoint me," in order that implied he believed I was capable of not disappointing him. It was a burden and a gift, a heavy mantle of expectation from the one person whose opinion I valued. I decided if I was going to do it, I had to submit the one photograph that meant the most to me, the one that was the purest distillation of my entire journey. It wasn't a technically complex shot. It wasn't dramatic. It was a photograph I had taken a year prior on a rare trip to the coast. I had been walking along a desolate stretch of beach in the off-season. The sky was a flat, unforgiving gray. The tourists were gone. It was a landscape of profound solitude. And there, amidst the dunes, was a single withered beech rose battered by the wind, and the salt spray its petals brown and curled at the edges. But in the center of this decaying bloom, a single perfect petal remained a vibrant, defiant slash of pink, still clinging to life. It was lit by a sliver of pale, watery sunlight that had broken through the clouds. To anyone else, it was just a dying flower. To me, it was everything. It was resilience. It was the stubborn refusal to fade away. It was the beauty in the overlooked, the imperfect, the thing that had been left behind. It was a self-portrait. I had spent hours waiting for that single fleeting moment of light. I had taken dozens of shots bracketing the exposure, minutely adjusting the composition. The final image was perfect. It was quiet, but it was powerful. I called it the unseen bloom. With a trembling hand and a feeling of utter insanity, I filled out the online submission form. I typed in my name, my contact information, the title of the piece. When I got to the part where I had to pay the entry fee, I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and entered my debit card information. The confirmation page appeared. Thank you for your submission to the 2025 Veridian Prize for Photography. I felt a wave of nausea and exhilaration. I had just thrown my most vulnerable, heartfelt creation into the void, alongside a significant chunk of my grocery money. I closed the laptop and tried to put it out of my mind. It was a lottery ticket, a shot in the dark. And now all I could do was go back to frothing milk and walking the city streets waiting for a verdict I was sure would never come. Life returned to its familiar grinding rhythm. I worked, I shot, I edited. The memory of the Veridian submission faded, becoming a distant, slightly embarrassing anecdote I told only to myself. I picked up a few more small freelance jobs, a restaurant menu, a local band's promo shots. Each one was a small victory that helped keep the wolves of doubt from the door. I was surviving. And in the world I had chosen for myself, survival was a form of success. My family, of course, remained blissfully unaware. My brother David had just had his second child, a boy. The family group chat was a constant stream of baby pictures and congratulations. My mother called me, her voice practically vibrating with grandmotherly pride. "Oh, Emma, you should see him. He has the Vance family eyes. When are you coming home to meet your new nephew?" I promised I would soon, all the while knowing that my presence was a secondary requirement, a box to be checked in their perfect family portrait. 3 months after I'd submitted The Unseen Bloom, I was sitting in my apartment on a Tuesday night editing a series of photos of subway musicians. It was late, and the city hummed its familiar lullaby outside my window. An email notification popped up on my screen. The subject line was simple, terrifyingly so, an important message from the Veridian Prize Committee. My blood ran cold. This was it. The official rejection. I had steeled myself for it, but the reality of it still made my stomach clench. I let the email sit there for a full 10 minutes, a digital death sentence I wasn't quite ready to read. I made a cup of tea. I straightened the papers on my desk. I did everything I could to delay the inevitable. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, I clicked it open. The first line was a blur. My brain refused to process it. I read it again, and a third time. Dear Ms. Vance, it is with immense pleasure that we inform you that the International Jury Committee has selected your photograph, The Unseen Bloom, as the grand prize winner of the 2025 Veridian Prize for Photography. I stopped breathing. The hum of the city, the ticking of the clock, everything faded into a roaring silence in my ears. It was impossible, a mistake. They must have sent the email to the wrong person. I scrolled down my eyes, scanning for the fine print, the clause that said, "Just kidding." But there it was, information about the prize money, a sum so large it made me feel lightheaded, and details about the awards ceremony in London. An all-expenses-paid trip. A solo exhibition at a prestigious gallery. I stood up, my legs shaking so violently I had to grab onto my desk to steady myself. A laugh escaped my lips, a strange, choked sound. Then another. And then I was crying. Not quiet, delicate tears, but huge, racking sobs that shook my entire body. It was a deluge, a release of all the years of frustration, of being dismissed, of being told I wasn't good enough. It was the validation I had stopped allowing myself to even dream of. I had won. Me, Emma Vance, the girl with the messy hobby, the aimless drifter. I had won the most important photography prize in the world. The moment was so immense, so profoundly personal, that I didn't even think to share it. It felt sacred, a secret too precious to be exposed to the outside world just yet. I sat on my floor for an hour just crying and laughing, letting the reality of it sink into my bones. When I could finally form a coherent thought, I knew there was only one person I could tell. I picked up my phone and dialed Alistair's number. He answered with his usual gruffness. "Finch." "I won," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Alistair, I won the Veridian." There was a long, profound silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his soft, raspy breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with an emotion I had never heard from him before. "I know," he said softly. "They called me an hour ago. I was on the jury." My mind reeled. He had been one of the judges. He had seen my name, my work, and he had fought for it. The vote, he continued, his voice steady and proud, was unanimous. "I told you not to disappoint me, Miss Vance. And you did not. I told my family I was taking a short vacation, a little trip to Europe I had saved up for. They were pleased in their own way." "Oh, how nice for you, dear," my mother said. "Maybe you'll meet a nice young man over there." The condescension was so reflexive, so ingrained, that I almost had to laugh. They had no idea I was flying first class. They had no idea I was being put up in a 5-star hotel. They had no idea that their aimless daughter was about to be honored on an international stage. And in that moment, I knew I would never tell them. The victory was sweeter, purer, because it was mine alone. The weeks following the win were a whirlwind of surreal, secret activity. I was in constant communication with the Veridian Prize organizers, a flurry of emails about travel arrangements, press releases, and the logistics for my upcoming solo exhibition. I had to hire a lawyer, recommended by Alistair, to look over the contracts. I had to open a new bank account to handle the prize money. I was living a double life on a scale I had never imagined. To the world, or at least the small, rarefied world of fine art photography, I was the astonishing, out-of-nowhere winner of the Veridian Prize. To my family, I was still just Emma the barista, who was being unusually cagey about her little trip. It was during this period that my mother called me, her voice buzzing with an excitement that was entirely disconnected from my own reality. "Emma, darling, I have the most wonderful news," she chirped. "You know how your father and I have been talking about getting a proper family portrait done for years. Well, we're finally going to do it." My heart sank. A family portrait. The ultimate symbol of familial unity, a curated image of togetherness and pride. An image I had never truly felt a part of. "We want to do it right," she continued, her voice breathy with the thrill of the project. "Not some cheap thing at a department store. We're going to hire a real photographer. A top-tier one. Someone truly special." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I mumbled something non-committal, but she was too caught up in her own enthusiasm to notice. A week later, she called again. "Okay, I have found the most perfect photographer. It's a bit of a splurge, but your father and I think it's worth it for a true heirloom. We want to capture the family at this stage, you know, with David doing so well, and the new baby." Her voice trailed off, the unspoken contrast hanging in the air. "And Well, at least you can be in the picture. Who's the photographer? I asked, a morbid curiosity taking hold. Oh, you wouldn't have heard of him, dear. He's very high-end. His name is Julian Croft. His work is just breathtaking. Very artistic. I almost dropped the phone. Julian Croft was not just high-end. He was a legend in the world of portrait photography, a contemporary of Alistair's, and a man whose work I had admired for years. He was also, as it happened, one of the other judges on the Veridian Prize committee. I had met him briefly via a video call the week before a preparatory meeting for the awards ceremony. He had been effusive in his praise for the unseen bloom. "Emma, are you there?" my mother asked, her voice tinged with impatience. "Yes, sorry, Mom. He sounds expensive?" "Well, yes," she admitted, a note of martyrdom in her tone. "He is. Your father and I are stretching a bit. But it's important. We need everyone to be there. David, his wife Sarah, the kids, of course. We've booked it for the Saturday after you get back from your trip." She paused and then delivered the line that felt like a punch to the gut, even though I should have expected it. "Actually, honey, we were thinking this one would just be the core family. You know me, your dad David and his family. The direct line for the main portrait on the wall. But you can come along to the studio, of course. We can get some casual snapshots with you afterwards." Just the core family. The direct line. I was an auxiliary member, a postscript. I had been officially, formally written out of the narrative. All those years of feeling like a footnote had just been confirmed in a single, casually delivered sentence. A hot, familiar shame washed over me, followed by something new and cold and sharp. It wasn't anger. It was a strange, cosmic sense of clarity. I held the phone to my ear, the roaring in my head subsiding into a quiet hum of purpose. They were going to have their perfect family portrait, the one that cemented their story of success with David at its center. And I was to be an onlooker, a guest at my own family's celebration of itself. The injustice of it was so profound, so perfectly in keeping with the narrative of my life, that it almost felt like a scene from a play. And I suddenly knew, with absolute certainty, how the next act would unfold. "You know what, Mom," I said, my voice startlingly calm. "You and Dad have been so generous to me over the years. I'd like to pay for the photographer. As a gift. A thank you for everything." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Emma, you can't possibly afford that." "I have some savings," I lied smoothly. "I want to do this. Please, let me treat the family." My mother was flustered, overwhelmed. "Well, I don't know what to say. That's incredibly generous, Emma. Are you sure she saw it not as a gesture of significant wealth, but as her wayward daughter finally doing something responsible, emptying her meager coffee shop savings for the good of the family?" It fit her narrative perfectly. "I'm sure," I said. "It's my gift. I'll handle all the arrangements with the studio directly. You just worry about getting everyone there on time." She was practically weeping with pride. "Oh, Emma, your father will be so pleased. You're such a good daughter." The words which I had once craved now felt hollow and absurd. I was a good daughter. I was about to give them the family portrait they'd always dreamed of. It was just going to come with a frame they never saw coming. The transaction was absurdly simple. I called Julian Croft's studio not as Emma Vance, the struggling barista, but as E. Vance, the Veridian Prize winner. The tone on the other end of the line was entirely different from the one my mother had likely encountered. There was no talk of waiting lists or consultations. The studio manager, a woman with a crisp British accent, recognized my name immediately. "Ms. Vance. What an honor. Mr. Croft was just speaking of you. He was so incredibly moved by your work." I explained the situation, framing it carefully. "It's a personal matter." I said the words feeling cool and precise in my mouth. "A gift for my family. They're under the impression they've commissioned Mr. Croft, but I will be handling the entire fee. Anonymously." "Of course, Ms. Vance. We can be very discreet." There's one other thing I added. As part of the gift, I'd like to loan a piece of my own for display in the studio during the session. A specific piece. That would be a privilege, she said. Which one? It's called The Unseen Bloom, I said. It needs to be framed to my specifications with a standard museum plaque, the title, my name, and the Veridian Prize notation. I'll have it couriered over from the gallery that's handling my exhibition pieces. Consider it done, Ms. Vance. Mr. Croft will be delighted. Delighted was an understatement. When Julian called me himself later that day, he was practically giddy. Emma, my dear girl, what a deliciously subversive little drama you're staging. It's Chekhovian, a family portrait paid for by the invisible daughter, with the evidence of her triumph hanging right there on the wall. It's brilliant. I feel like I'm a co-conspirator in a masterpiece of social theater. His enthusiasm was infectious, and it solidified my resolve. This wasn't an act of petty revenge. It was, as Julian had so perfectly put it, a piece of theater. It was about revealing a truth not through angry confrontation, but through the quiet, irrefutable evidence of the work itself. My work. The day of the photo shoot arrived. I had returned from London 2 days prior, the heavy bronze medal of the Veridian Prize tucked away in my suitcase like a secret heart. My family was in a tizzy of preparation. My mother called me 3 times in the morning to discuss wardrobe choices for David's children. She seemed to have forgotten her earlier declaration that I was not to be in the main portrait, and now talked as if I were a valued consultant. Do you think little Chloe should wear the navy blue dress or the cream one, Emma? You have such an artistic eye. The words were meant as a casual compliment, but they landed with the weight of 1,000 previous insults. My artistic eye, once a source of concern and derision, was now a useful tool for their grand performance. I begged off, claiming I had to run errands. I'll meet you all there a bit later, Mom, like we talked about, for the casual shots. All right, dear, don't be late, and thank you again for this. It's the nicest thing you've ever done. I arrived at Julian Croft's studio an hour before my family was scheduled to appear. It was a stunning space, a converted warehouse with soaring ceilings, exposed brick walls, and vast north-facing windows that flooded the room with a soft, beautiful light. And there, on the most prominent wall of the reception area where my family would be waiting, was my photograph. It was breathtaking. The gallery had framed it exquisitely, a simple, elegant black frame that made the image pop. It was large, at least 30 by 40 inches, far bigger than I had ever seen it. The details were magnificent, the texture of the sand, the delicate veins on the withered petals, and that single defiant splash of pink at its heart. It dominated the room. And beneath it, on a small, gleaming brass plaque, were the words, "The Unseen Bloom." Emma Vance. Winner 2025 International Veridian Prize for Photography. I stood before it, my creation, my secret, my truth. Julian came out of the main studio and stood beside me. He didn't say a word, just put a hand gently on my shoulder. We stood there together in the quiet, reverent light, 2 conspirators waiting for the curtain to rise. This wasn't about rubbing their noses in my success. It was about forcing them for the first time in my life to see me, to see the person I had become, not in spite of their dismissal, but in the quiet, fertile space it had created. I had bloomed in the unseen corners of their world, and now my work was hanging on the wall, waiting to introduce me. The bell above the studio door chimed a bright, clear sound that sliced through the quiet anticipation. My family had arrived. I had retreated to a small adjoining office, with Julian, the door left slightly ajar, allowing us a perfect unseen vantage point into the waiting area. It felt both clandestine and necessary, like a director watching the audience settle in before the show begins. First came David, striding in with the easy, unearned confidence of a man whose life has been a series of open doors. He was holding the hand of his 4-year-old daughter, Chloe, who was swathed in the cream-colored dress I had inadvertently chosen. His wife Sarah followed, holding their infant son, and looking slightly harried but impeccably put together. Then came my father, looking proud and proprietary, his chest puffed out as he surveyed the impressive studio. And finally, my mother, the orchestrator of this grand event, her face flushed with excitement and social anxiety. "Oh my," she breathed, taking in the soaring ceilings and the expensive-looking furniture. "Isn't this just spectacular, David? I told you he was the real deal." They moved into the center of the room, shedding coats and adjusting clothes. They were so absorbed in their own collective importance in the performance of being a family, worthy of a Julian Croft portrait, that for a full minute none of them noticed the photograph. It was Sarah who saw it first. She had settled the baby into his carrier and was idly looking around the room, her gaze sweeping over the brick walls. She stopped, her head tilted. "Oh, wow," she said, her voice quiet. "Look at that photograph. That's absolutely stunning." The others turned their attention, drawn to the large framed image on the wall. There was a collective murmur of appreciation. "Goodness, that is beautiful," my mother said, stepping closer. "So simple, but it makes you feel something, doesn't it?" My father grunted in agreement, a rare aesthetic concession from him. "Must be one of his," he said, gesturing vaguely. "Part of the package." David, ever the pragmatist, walked right up to it, squinting as if to appraise its value. Incredible detail, he pronounced the way he might comment on the stitching of a leather briefcase. "You can see every grain of sand." It was Sarah again, a reader by nature, who leaned in to look at the small brass plaque. She was silent for a moment. I could see her brows furrow in confusion. She read it, then looked back at the photograph, then back at the plaque. "That's strange," she said slowly. "What is it, dear?" my mother asked, moving to her side. Sarah didn't answer. She just pointed. My mother, father, and David all leaned in a small huddled group, their heads bent together as they read the inscription. From my hiding place, I couldn't hear the intake of breath, but I could feel it. I saw the physical shift in their bodies. My father took a half step back, as if the plaque had physically pushed him. My mother's hand flew to her chest, a gesture of pure, unadulterated shock. David just stood there, frozen, his mouth slightly agape, looking back and forth between the name on the wall and the memory of the daughter and sister he thought he knew. Emma Vance. The name, my name, hung in the air, suddenly imbued with a weight and significance they had never assigned to it. Winner 2025 International Veridian Prize for Photography. This was the part that broke them. This was the detail that their minds simply could not compute. It was an alien language, a fact from a parallel universe that had just crashed into their carefully constructed reality. Their Emma, the quiet, aimless coffee shop, Emma could not be this person. It wasn't possible. Julian Croft chose that precise moment to make his entrance. He emerged from the studio, a broad, welcoming smile on his face, looking every bit the legendary artist they had expected. "Ah, you must be the Vance family," he boomed, his voice warm and inviting. He shook my father's hand, then David's. "Welcome, welcome. I see you're admiring the newest piece in my collection." My father, looking utterly bewildered, could only stammer, The plaque. There must be a mistake. That's our daughter's name." Julian's smile widened. He feigned a look of delightful surprise. "No, you're Emma's family, the Emma Vance." "My goodness, I had no idea. What a wonderful coincidence." He gestured extravagantly towards the photograph. "Your daughter is a genius, an absolute prodigy, the Veridian Prize. You know, it's the Nobel of our world. We were all on the jury together. Her unseen bloom, it left us all speechless. A masterpiece." He then turned to my mother, who looked as if she might faint. "And she's the one who arranged all of this for you. Such a generous gift. She insisted on it." He let that last sentence land, each word a perfectly placed stone, shattering the last vestiges of their narrative. The gift wasn't from her meager savings. The gift was from a world of success so far beyond their comprehension that they had never even suspected its existence. The daughter they had left out of the family portrait was the one who had not only funded the photographer, but was his peer, his colleague, and artist he admired. The frame didn't just have her name on it. The entire room, the entire situation was now framed by her achievement, and their faces a canvas of shocked disbelief and a slowly dawning excruciating embarrassment were the true masterpiece in the room. The silence that followed Julian's proclamation was the most profound silence I have ever witnessed. It was not an absence of sound, but a presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket of disbelief and humiliation. My family stood frozen like figures in a photograph, their planned expressions of happy confident togetherness melting into masks of utter confusion. The studio, which was supposed to be the stage for their triumph, had become a courtroom, and my photograph was the star witness testifying against every assumption they had ever made about me. David was the first to find his voice, though it was strained, unrecognizable. That's not possible," he said, shaking his head as if to clear it. He looked at Julian, then at the plaque, then back at Julian. "Our Emma? She works at a coffee shop." The words came out as a statement of fact, a plea for the world to make sense again. He was offering up his version of me, the one they had all co-authored, hoping it would negate the impossible truth on the wall. Julian Croft, a master of timing, simply chuckled a rich, knowing sound. "Oh, many artists do. We have to pay the bills while we make the work. But I assure you, your sister is one of the most important new voices in contemporary photography. Her career is going to be stratospheric. You must be incredibly proud." Proud was not the word I would have used to describe their expressions. Flabbergasted was closer. Mortified was even better. My father, a man who was never at a loss for words, who could command a boardroom and a backyard barbecue with equal authority, was utterly speechless. He just stared at the photograph, his face a pallid gray. He was a man whose entire worldview, a simple linear equation where effort plus practicality equals success, had just been proven spectacularly wrong. My mother, on the other hand, began to react. Her shock was curdling into a frantic, flustered attempt at damage control. "Well, of course we knew," she stammered, smoothing down her dress with trembling hands. "We always knew Emma had a special talent. We were just waiting for her to find her moment. We've always been her biggest supporters." The lie was so transparent, so patently false, that it was almost painful to witness. It was the desperate, reflexive spin of someone trying to rewrite history in real time to absorb my success into their own narrative, as if they had been nurturing it all along. Sarah, my sister-in-law, shot a quick, pitying glance at her, then looked away, a blush of second-hand embarrassment coloring her cheeks. She knew. She had been on the receiving end of enough of my mother's condescending comments about my drifting to know that this was a lie. It was at that moment that I chose to make my entrance. I pushed open the office door and stepped into the room. I didn't say anything. I just walked over to stand near Julian, a quiet co-host of this bizarre reception. 4 pairs of eyes swiveled to look at me. It was as if they were seeing me for the first time. I was no longer Emma, the disappointing daughter. I was Emma Vance, the name on the plaque. I was a stranger in their midst, wearing a familiar face. "Emma." My mother breathed, her voice a reedy whisper. She looked from me to the photograph, to Julian, and back to me. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture she did not want to see. The little trip to Europe. The savings for the photographer. It had all been a lie. Or rather, it had been a truth so large she had been unable to see it. My father finally spoke, his voice low and gravelly. You won. That he gestured towards the wall, the question hanging in the air. It was more than a question about a prize. It was a question about my entire life, about the secret I had kept from them for years. I did, I said, my voice even, and calm. There was no triumph in it, no, I told you so. Just a simple statement of fact. The immediate aftermath was a clumsy, awkward dance of avoidance. The grand family portrait session, the very reason for their being there, was now an excruciatingly awkward obligation. Julian, ever the professional, gently herded them into the studio. Well, shall we make some magic? He chirped, his cheerfulness a stark contrast to the funereal mood that had descended. Throughout the shoot, I watched from the sidelines. I saw the forced smiles, the stiff postures. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by a self-conscious uncertainty. They were acutely aware of my gaze, the gaze of the daughter. They had underestimated the artist, who was now judging their composition. The power dynamic had been irrevocably, seismically altered. They were no longer the arbiters of my worth. In a bizarre twist, I had become the arbiter of theirs. The casual snapshots with me, the ones that were supposed to be an afterthought, were never mentioned. The main portrait was all they could handle. They just wanted it to be over. The drive home, I imagine, must have been a symphony of silent recriminations. I did not go with them. I stayed behind to thank Julian and to supervise the careful deinstallation of my photograph. When I finally took a cab back to my own small, quiet apartment, it was with a profound sense of release. The confrontation I had dreaded and avoided for years had happened, and it hadn't been a screaming match or a tearful breakdown. It had been quiet, clinical, and utterly definitive. It was an exposure in the truest photographic sense of the word, a moment where light had been shone on a hidden truth, fixing it permanently into existence. The phone calls started 2 hours later. The first was from my mother. Her voice was different, stripped of its usual breezy confidence. It was hesitant, fragile. "Emma, honey, it's me." There was a long pause. "We're home," I figured I said, keeping my tone neutral. We need to talk about this," she said. "I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us?" The question, which should have been infuriating, was almost pitiable. "Why didn't I tell you?" "Because you gave me 1,000 reasons not to. Because every time I offered you a small piece of my artistic soul, you treated it with indifference or condescension. Because you never created a space safe enough for my truth." I didn't say any of that. The time for those explanations was long past. The evidence had already been presented. "There was never a right time," I said, which was both a lie and the absolute truth. "We always supported you, Emma." She insisted, the desperate lie from the studio making a second appearance. "We just wanted you to be secure." "I am secure, Mom," I said, and for the first time, I realized the absolute truth of that statement. My security wasn't in a bank account, though that was now a reality. My security was internal. It was in the knowledge of my own abilities, in the validation of my work in the community of artists like Julian and Alistair, who saw me and respected me. I didn't need her version of security anymore. The conversation was circular, pointless. She was trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she had with the woman who had just been revealed. She was scrambling to find her footing in a world that no longer behaved according to her rules. The call from my father later that night was even more difficult. He was not a man who apologized. He was a man who pontificated, who advised, who directed. To be in a position of not knowing, of having been wrong, was alien territory for him. "Emma," he said, his voice gruff, heavy, "that picture on the wall, that prize, is it a big deal?" It was a raw, honest question. He was asking for a translation, for a way to quantify my success in a language he could understand. Was it as big a deal as David's promotion, as solid an investment as his stock portfolio? "It is, Dad," I said gently. "In my world, it's a very big deal. And the money. Julian said you paid for all of it." "Yes, There was another long, heavy silence. I could hear the gears turning in his head, the calculations being run. He was reframing his entire perception of me based on this new stunning data point financial success. It was the only metric he truly trusted. He didn't understand the art, but he understood the prize money. It was a crude, imperfect form of understanding, but it was a start. "Well," he said finally, his voice thick. "Huh." It was the most eloquent admission of defeat he was capable of. My brother David didn't call. He sent a text message the next day, a single sterile line. "Congratulations. We need to talk." It was the text of a man whose position as the undisputed golden child had just been seriously challenged. His identity, so long defined by being the successful one, the reliable one, was now in question. The family narrative had been built around his triumphs. My sudden spectacular success had rendered that narrative obsolete. They were all struggling. They were trying to reconcile their lifelong perception of me with this new, undeniable reality. They were sifting through the wreckage of their own misconceptions, looking for a way to piece together a new story where they weren't the antagonists. But the truth was, their reaction, their shock, their fumbling attempts to recalibrate had very little to do with me anymore. I was an observer to their crisis, not a participant in it. The power they had held over me, the power to define me, to diminish me, was gone. It had vanished under the bright, impartial lights of Julian Croft's studio. In the weeks that followed the great revelation, a strange and profound peace settled over me. The anticipated storm of family drama, the tearful recriminations and angry confrontations I had always feared never truly materialized. Instead, there was a quiet, awkward, and almost complete reversal of the family dynamic. The power had shifted, and I found that the validation I had once so desperately craved from them no longer held any appeal. I had moved on, and the climax at the studio hadn't been for them to see me, but for me to see that I no longer needed to be seen by them. The frame with my name on it, I realized, was not a weapon I had wielded against them. It was a mirror I had held up to myself. For years, I had allowed their perception of me to color my own self-worth. Their dismissal had planted a seed of doubt that I constantly had to fight to uproot. Had I really been a struggling, aimless artist? Or had I been an artist in training, diligently honing my craft in the face of their indifference? The Veridian Prize was, of course, a powerful external validator. But the true victory was internal. It was the realization that I had been on the right path all along, even when no one else could see it. I hadn't been lost. I had been on a different map entirely. My internal journey had reached its resolution long before they saw that plaque. It had happened in the quiet moments in the dark room, watching an image bloom into life. In the thrill of capturing a perfect, fleeting moment of light. In the gruff, validating words of Alistair Finch. In the email from Urban Canvas. In the solitary, tearful joy of learning I had won the prize. Those were the moments that had built my self-worth brick by brick. The scene at the studio was not the creation of my confidence. It was merely its public unveiling. I didn't seek their apologies, though they came in their own clumsy, indirect ways. My mother started sending me links to art reviews and articles about other photographers, a desperate attempt to speak my language. It was a gesture so foreign to our previous relationship that it was almost comical. My father, in a move that stunned me, asked to see my portfolio. He sat at my kitchen table one afternoon, silently flipping through my prints, his face a mask of concentration. He didn't say much. "This one is interesting. I like the light here." But the act itself was a concession, an admission that there was a world of my creation that he had never bothered to enter. David finally called, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. The conversation was stilted, uncomfortable. He was trying to understand a sister he had only ever seen as a satellite to his son. The core of his confusion was that I had done it all alone in secret. "Why didn't you ask for help?" he asked. "I could have given you money." It was the only way he knew how to relate through financial assistance. He couldn't comprehend that what I needed from them wasn't money. It was belief. And since they couldn't provide that, I had sought it and found it elsewhere. I felt a strange sense of compassion for them. Their world was so small, their definitions of success so narrow. They had built a comfortable, predictable reality, and I had, by simply being myself, revealed its limitations. Their struggle to reconcile their old Emma with the new one was their journey, not mine. I was free. I was no longer the girl left out of the family portrait. I was the artist who had framed the entire scene. The need for their approval, a weight I had carried for so long, I had forgotten what it felt like to be. Without it, had simply evaporated. It had been replaced by a quiet, solid confidence that came not from a prize or a plaque, but from the profound, unshakable knowledge of my own worth, a worth I had fought for, earned, and finally learned to see for myself. The family portrait now hangs above the fireplace in my parents' living room. I've seen it once on a brief obligatory visit for Christmas. It's a technically perfect photograph. Julian Croft is a master after all. The lighting is soft and flattering. My brother David, his wife Sarah, and their two beautiful children are arranged in a tableau of domestic bliss. My parents stand behind them, radiating a practiced, if somewhat strained, pride. It is the image of the perfect family they always wanted to project. But to me, the portrait is haunted. There's a ghost in the machine. The smiles don't quite reach their eyes. There's a new awareness in their postures, a subtle self-consciousness that wasn't there before. They know what I know: the entire artifice was funded by the success of the person they deliberately excluded from the frame. Our relationship has found a new, strange equilibrium. The dismissiveness is gone, replaced by a cautious, almost fearful respect. They ask about my work now. They inquire about my travels, my exhibitions, my next projects. They speak my name, Emma Vance, with a certain reverence, as if it belongs to a distant, impressive relative they are trying to claim. But the intimacy, the easy familiarity that should exist between family, is gone. We are like diplomats from two different countries observing strict protocols, careful not to cause a diplomatic incident. They are careful not to condescend. I am careful not to sound triumphant. It is polite, it is civil, but it is not warm. I'm not sure it ever can be again. I don't mind. My life is no longer defined by their living room, by their expectations, by their frames. My life is my studio, a sprawling, light-filled space I bought with the prize money. It smells of darkroom chemicals and fresh coffee, a scent I now associate not with drudgery, but with creation and freedom. My days are my own. I work on my own terms on projects that ignite my soul. I'm preparing for a new exhibition, a series on the symbiotic relationship between urban decay and nature. A theme I return to again and again. It's the story of my life, in a way, something beautiful and resilient, growing in a place that was neglected and forgotten. Sometimes, when I'm working late, the city lights painting patterns on my wall, I think about that old family dynamic. The girl who hid in the basement, who was told her passion was a waste of time, feels like a character from a novel I once read. I feel a sense of tenderness for her, a fierce pride in her quiet, stubborn defiance. She built a fortress of secrecy to protect her dream, and from that fortress, she built an empire. I am no longer seeking external validation. The Veridian Prize was a key, but it opened a door to a room I had already built. My fulfillment comes from the work itself, from the patient waiting for the right light, from the quiet hum of the printer, as an image I have nurtured, comes into the world from the silent conversation between my eye, my camera, and my subject. The final quiet resolution came not in a confrontation or a conversation, but in a simple, solitary act. A few months ago, I printed a new copy of The Unseen Bloom. It's a large artist's proof, the finest I have ever made. It doesn't hang in a gallery or a museum. It hangs on the main wall of my own apartment. There is no plaque beneath it. It doesn't need one. I know who made it. I know what it means. The family portrait hangs in their house, a monument to a story they wanted to tell. But my photograph, my story, hangs here in my space. And in this frame, I am not the one who was left out. I am the one who is finally completely home. The quiet, satisfying click of my camera's shutter as I capture a new image is the only applause I will ever need.